Good morning, everyone. Today we have a very interesting conversation. It's going to be on the intersection of in-house practice, technology, and social justice. Folks who go to law school tend to have an opinion about social justice. So I am sure you're going to find this very impactful. We as in-house lawyers increasingly advise on all kinds of things, not just legal things. And doing it well and doing it intentionally is an art worth perfecting. So I have a fantastic guest who will take us on this journey. And if you have questions, definitely ask, because you are so much more likely to get something out of the conversation if you're actually in it, participating and asking questions. So do that. And before we begin, I'm going to give you my invitation to nominate someone from the in-house community, whether it's a lawyer or not, who is doing something amazing with her practice, career, impact, social life, or community life. Because we know that in-house lawyers are humans first, and they have more than just professional lives. So if there's someone we want to learn from, or you want to learn from, nominate this person. I would love to invite them here. Everyone who joins me has been nominated by someone. And it's absolutely fine to nominate yourself. In fact, I consider it to be an act of courage. And with that in mind, I'm going to welcome my guest, Fatima. Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. I am so excited for you to be here. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Olga. Hi, everyone. My name is Fatima Jafri. I am a lead product counsel for the social impact products at Meta.
That is not a small job, and I want to hear all about it. But before I ask you your current job, tell me how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I've always had a passion for social justice and for social equality. I am the child of two immigrant parents who came to this country from Pakistan, worked really hard. And so, the notion of equality and working to make the world a more equitable and just place was a really, really fundamental part of my upbringing. And so, I was actually in graduate school and I was studying economic development. I thought that I was going to be a diplomat or in academia. And I took a course, human rights policy. And from then, I really, it became very clear to me how the law was such a transformative tool to be able to inspire the social justice goals that I had. So I went to law school at the same time I was getting my master's. During law school, I had the opportunity to pursue a lot of different internships. I interned at Kiva doing really interesting microfinance work. I also interned at the Department of Commerce working on commercial law development programs around the world. And those two experiences were very transformative because it was the first time that I really saw the nexus between technology development and the law. And that really, really inspired my career trajectory. So I moved to Silicon Valley after law school. And my focus was really on this intersectionality. I worked at two small law firms where I worked with startups, mostly on corporate financings, but I did a lot of pro bono work and I focused a lot of their efforts on having that social impact as part of their product strategy. That brought me to my first in-house gig at ChargePoint, which is an electric vehicle charging station company. I was very interested in green tech and the way in which we can enhance that. And I, worked very closely. Of course, I was a lawyer on the team, but I worked also very closely with our policy team and making sure that we were at the forefront of impacting policy and helping, reduce greenhouse emissions. Again, that passion for social justice and, using technology to really make the world a better place continued to inspire my work. And then almost 3 years ago, I was recruited to be the lead attorney for all of our social impact products at Meta. I think the common strain both between my personal and professional life has been this commitment to social justice and social equality, and using the law and using technology as a catalyst to do that.
Oh, I love that journey. It's such a Wonderful journey. And I love the story you tell about it. I'm going to ask you, I guess, maybe a somewhat hard question then, because somewhere between, the day we enter law school in OCI, we decide that we need to choose between, a good living and doing the right thing. And you're someone who seems to not buy into that. When did you have that realization that you can, work for a company and still do the right thing and pursue your life work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And frankly, something that, I moved to Silicon Valley in 2013. And I will say that the environment at that time when I moved to the current environment is drastically different. So I think when I moved in 2013, there certainly was that sort of divide between, you had like the non-for-profit folks, and then you had very tech-heavy startups. But I do think that, there's been this seismic shift where technology companies are quickly seeing the awesome power that they have, that technology does not, listen to nation state borders, for example. Technology is agnostic. Technology is so transformative. And I think once startups and technology companies themselves realized the awesome power they yielded, there was a quick focus to yield that awesome power to, impacting positive change in the world. And I think I was really lucky to be in Silicon Valley at that time of that reckoning. And so, when I was at the law firms, a lot of the startups who would come into our offices were initially, of course, focused on their technology and getting the appropriate patents and legal protections around that. But very quickly, you saw that there was a conversation around disruption and how their products and their technology were disrupting traditional spaces. And a lot of those traditional spaces were around access. And these startups were disrupting the whole notion that only certain people had access to technology or capital or banking institutions. And I think with that idea of disruption, the whole idea of positive impact was sort of a natural nexus. And I would love to say that I sort of masterminded that sort of, idea of being able to, have a comfortable living, but also making meaningful impact. But I do think that there has been a seismic shift, in Silicon Valley. And you've been here for a while too. I'm sure you've seen it as well, where companies are prioritizing positive impact of their products in a way that I certainly did not see when I first came here.
Yeah, no, I've definitely seen it. And I've struggled with, that's why I asked that question, because I've gone through that choice. Most of us who go to law school have a sort of definition of justice. And I felt kind of forced to choose. I refused to choose. But I agree with you, there have been a shift. And in fact, in the last few jobs, I have been specifically hired to have conversations with, policymakers, members of the public, and doing and advice on the right thing as intentionally, not just kind of an afterthought. So I'm with you. I also think that it takes an openness to look for it. So I think it's a combination of things. So before we go, I do want to talk about sort of technology and impact on social justice, because it's a very rich place for conversation. And I know a lot of in-house attorneys and law firm attorneys interested. Help me. In your scope of work today at Facebook, right? Because you might have had more than kind of one responsibility. Where have you been, and what is your focus today?
So my current product coverage is elections and equity. And I used to cover all of our health products. So I always call it sort of the three heavy hitters, both in terms of regulatory and public scrutiny, but also I think also in terms of importance and impact. So I was leading all of our health product teams during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, one of the issues that Meta, in addition to a lot of other tech platforms was grappling with was this, problem of misinformation and this proliferation of misinformation on our platform. And so I worked very, very closely with both our policy and engineering teams to really think through how we should think through, content moderation and misinformation. And we thought about it in a sort of a variety and multi-pronged approach. We sort of took a traditional approach where we trained ML models to sort of, either demote or delete misinformation. So we took down over 20 million pieces of content. But we also developed products that would sort of organically demote low quality misinformation and really up-level high-quality authoritative sources from the CDC, from the ministries of health. So we developed a COVID information hub where users could enter into the hub and get authoritative information from CDC, from ministries of health around best practices. And I think that's a really unique place for in-house counsel to think through their impact. It's not just regurgitating the black letter of the law or the legal requirements, but it's also thinking through product, business, and UX that can really impact the type of goals that your business and policy and product teams are trying to achieve. So my product and policy teams, the goal for them was to enhance, good quality information and demote misinformation. How can we do that in a legally sound way that's also socially impactful? We can do that through, of course, training ML models and algorithms, but we also should think about organic ways that we can do so, and partnerships with WHO and CDC to really enhance that voice.
That is not something law school teaches you to do. That's hence going to be my next question. How do you acquire that knowledge and skill? I just recently actually had a conversation about what it means to be a product lawyer and how that is not even taught in law school. You are taking what it means to be a product lawyer even further, and kind of how to advise people to do the right thing and how to make sure that we do it in a way that is, feels good and has a positive impact, and obviously legal. But legal is probably the lowest bar here, where you have much higher bars. So how do you learn? Like, if I am in a beginning, middle, or end of my career and I want to pivot into that amazing work, where do I start?
Sure. No, it's a great question. And I think, I speak to a lot of law students, both in sort of a more formalized capacity, but also, in terms of mentoring. And one thing that I really, really try to focus on is that real world, particularly in-house experience, is so much about relationship building and cross-functional partnership. I would not be able to do my job without my excellent policy, privacy, product, and engineering cross-functional teams. I work with them every day, often more than my legal colleagues. And I think, I think that particularly with technology, particularly because it's so multifaceted and because the impact, again, is so great, all of these stakeholders need to be in the room. So there's not just legal advice. We need to think through the privacy implications. Of course, at a huge company like Facebook and Meta that have been in the news a lot about our privacy policies and posturing, privacy is a huge part of our consideration. Policy, if we are launching this product in the United States, can we launch the same product, for example, in LATAM or APAC, or even in the EU? What does this mean from like an engineering perspective? So I think the one thing that they don't teach you in law school, frankly, is one of the most important part of my jobs, which is cross-functional engagement and stakeholder management. And, when I tell law students, how they can acquire that skill while they're in law school, it's really through forcing yourself to think outside the scope of your law books. And whether that means internships, or if that means like taking a course at the business school or the public policy school, or even just sitting in on those classes, just to understand what other stakeholders, what is important to them, what their ultimate directives are, and how you can work best to achieve that together.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. And I hope one day this will be actually intentionally taught in law school, both the product lawyer practice and advising on social impact and doing the right thing. Because in the end, as I said, many of us go to law school because we have a definition of justice and a very strong one at that. Let's talk about, I know you have a very strong opinion about impact and technology and the barriers there. So curious about your views and the opportunities in that space.
Sure. So, I would say that I came to Meta not necessarily as a skeptic, but very, very interested in the role of big tech in sort of impact, particularly around the world. As I mentioned, my parents are immigrants from Pakistan. I still have, family and friends all over the world. And for us, Facebook products really are a lifeline. WhatsApp, I, use every day to communicate with my family abroad, both for happy times, sending pictures of my children, but also in very dire times when, a government decides to shut off cellular services and the only way you can access your friends and families through Wi-Fi. So the products have been very, very ingrained, in part of my everyday life. That being said, I saw the impact of misinformation, for example, in certain communities. And I wanted to, again, have a seat at that table to be able to really see a lot of those complexities. And so, one of the teams that I lead is the elections team, for example. For US 2026, we had a lot of really, really interesting learnings. For 2016, we had a lot of really interesting learnings that would really help us inform our policies and our posture for US 2020. We helped over 4.5 million people vote on platform for 2020. We had an elections information center that over 140 million people accessed. And so that's just an example of the awesome power of our products. And that's, I think that's what inspires me every day to see the real world impact and the numbers. The numbers are so staggering when you think of the, billions of people who access Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, Oculus on a daily basis. That platform is huge. And so I think that's really what inspires me every day, because I realize the reach is so huge. I speak to a lot of in-house lawyers, and I feel very blessed and lucky to be at a company that has such an awesome reach, but that doesn't mean that, if you're in a small startup or a much more sort of specific space, Facebook sort of covers, Messenger and Oculus and AR, VR, but it doesn't mean that if you're in a smaller space that your impact is any less. I think that it means that as a lawyer, you should constantly be looking at the real world impact, just as you do legal risk, and partnering with policy stakeholders and privacy stakeholders daily to make sure that your legal advice is consistent with that real world impact.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, as you sort of think about the transformation of in-house practice, right? It was very interesting for me that you said that, in my practice, I actually get to focus. But in other companies, that actually is part of your job if you don't have a separate team. And then so it seems to me that this question of doing the right thing, access and technology is no longer sort of just the right thing to do or just a nice thing to do. That is, we increasingly see it as that's what a responsible company behavior, just like keeping good accounting books, and then doing the right thing for your employees. I'm just curious, how are you thinking about this kind of future of access and technology and what it means to be a responsible company?
Yeah, I think you made a really, really great point that this is not just sort of a nice to have or doing good. I think it's being responsible. And I think from a legal perspective, I think it means, just because something is not written in the black letter of the law, it doesn't mean that regulators or frankly the public will not scrutinize you for it. We have this joke internally that, anytime there's like a Wall Street Journal or New York Times article that's critical, we sort of presume that Mark or someone from leadership will be in front of Congress the next week. And, it's sort of a very dark joke, but the reality is that, we're trying to do good for the world, but we're also, very cognizant that regulators and our relationship with regulators is sort of anchored in, keeping privacy and social impact and real world impact top of mind. And so it's not just a nice to have anymore and something that you share with your shareholders at the annual meeting, but it's increasingly becoming a legal requirement, whether it's through algorithmic fairness legislation in the EU or privacy principles through GDPR or, the litany of privacy regulations in Brazil or India. This is becoming increasingly a requirement that these governments and regulators are seeing the incredible impact and power of our products and platforms and want to make sure that it's done in a responsible manner. And I think, I can speak for Meta, and I think Meta welcomes that. I think we would love more guidance from regulators and more engagement. Mark and leadership have spoken a lot about that, about the engagement between private companies or private corporations and public government agencies on, understanding these technologies in ways that we can sort of empower them to be more responsible and have a more positive impact.
Yeah, I find that I've had many conversations with legislators, especially about disruptive technologies. I specifically have had many conversations on Capitol Hill about crypto and blockchain. Also in Sacramento as well, and with many regulators worldwide. What I find is that folks don't always understand technology. there is a gap, and this was I think it's fairly complex technology. But I also think that people don't really understand Facebook, which I think is much simpler technology. At least some of it is simpler. Obviously, you have the various other components like VR, which is a little bit more complicated, and now metaverse, and which is also intertwined with blockchain. But I find that this dialogue is really helpful to actually just kind of explain who you are and how you work, and really guide there. But I also think that humanizing technology is important. We're not just you're not a bot, I'm not a bot. I have family and I want my kids to live inherent the world that is sustainable and amazing. And having like a girl like Olga or a girl like Fatima show up and stand behind it and explain it and work with regulators and the legislators is very important to humanize technology. What efforts do you think are useful for in-house counsel to engage? Like, how do you humanize technology? How do you make it warm and fuzzy and care and convince everybody else that you actually share that passion and of sustainability of technology? How do you make technology more human?
In many ways, the law and technology have a lot of parallels, right? So on its face, one could argue that the law and technology are neutral. But of course, we quickly see both with the law and technology, there's disparate impacts. There's certain communities interact or engage with the law or technology in a different way and have, because of that, have a different impact. And I think because of my legal training, I have sort of that, that I really think through that analogy a lot, that, on its face, the law can arguably be neutral, but we see in that how it impacts different communities is very different. And that's how I think through technology. So I think, with, in-house counsel, my advice about humanizing the law is, technology is the same that I would say about humanizing the law, is thinking about the impact that technology actually has on people on their day-to-day. So you can have the best intentions, but if you think about the actual impact and put yourself in those communities' shoes. So for example, during COVID-19, we did a huge Meta was really at the forefront of a lot of COVID-19 efforts. So we launched a product called Volunteering, where users could, post through very localized posts saying, hey, I have some extra N95 masks and I'm going to leave them out on my porch. We launched that product in the US and a bunch of other jurisdictions. We were all really excited. The product team was super excited. And a few policymakers in other countries came back to us and said, this is a great product, but we're worried that this could inherently have people violate stay-at-home orders. So as you know, in some countries had a much more stricter stay-at-home orders than the US. And so the idea of people posting about goods or services outside the home, there was a worry that it would encourage people to violate these stay-at-home orders. That's a consideration that legal and policy hadn't even really thought of. We just thought this was a great product for communities and neighborhoods to really come together. And so I think that's an example where if we had really thought hard about the real world impact and about the way that, a product or a feature could impact whether it's stay-at-home orders or, other communities, we would have maybe understood that nuance. And, I give that example a lot because I think it's a learning opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to think through not just, the immediate product need, but thinking through how a certain product feature or launch is going to land in a certain community.
That is such a great example. And I can see how that could be a mess. But I guess in the end, it's what you learn from it and how you react. That's what matters. I have a few more questions and I would kind of quickly coming to the end. It's one thing to realize that, you need to humanize technology as a company. It's part of your product cycle to do the right thing. It's a responsibility. It's another thing to do that at scale. And really, leave it and breathe it, and make sure that it's sort of part of the culture. Do you have any thoughts on how in-house counsel can guide their internal clients and maintain maybe relationship with regulators to make sure that all of those good intentions are done at scale?
Yeah. So, I can speak to my first in-house experience. I was the third lawyer at ChargePoint. I think I was employee 230. So it was a tiny, tiny shop when I joined. And at that time, because it was only 3 lawyers, we were still legal was still very much sort of defined as the contract reviewers or the folks you go to if you need an NDA signed, or sort of, we would work really closely with finance, or, our financings. And I think, part of my goal was to establish cross-functional relationships. And so I really think that starts with relationship building. I started doing a lot more privacy and GDPR work. And so I would set up these office hours twice a week where engineering and product teams could sign up and come with all of their hypotheticals, all of their questions. I really think that small step really helped sort of socialize the idea of legal being a major stakeholder at the table, not just for legal issues, but for product development, for business analysis, for even business development and corporate development about, companies we would acquire or, do an asset purchase agreement with. And so I think it starts off with relationship building. And for me, it was very grassroots. It started off as a very organic effort to sort of answer privacy issues and concerns. I would do, attorney-client privilege trainings for the product and engineering teams all the time and sales teams. And so, I thought of entry points that I could sort of, immerse myself into non-legal functions. And through that, it really organically developed into legal being a major stakeholder and legal having a seat at the table, and sales teams or engineering teams proactively coming to legal when they were interested in a partnership agreement or thinking through a new feature that they would launch into the EU to make sure it was GDPR compliant. And so I think it starts off with small organic steps and, very focused on those relationships. And it really, really, you do get your investment back. You do get, the opportunity for, to have a seat at the table, but it takes a lot of work on the front end to establish those relationships.
Have you had any setbacks that force you to sort of assess the role of technology in our lives and kind of what have you learned in those experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think coming from a smaller startup like ChargePoint to a larger company like Meta, I think the biggest learning opportunity there was at Meta. Our legal team is almost 1,000 people. And so a lot of the stakeholder involvement is within legal. And so our litigation team has a different, focus than our privacy team, than our product team. And so I think I wouldn't call it a setback, but I think the biggest learning opportunity for me is that when you're working within legal, being able to represent your business and product teams as best as you can, and also being able to sort of absorb a lot of the other legal constraints, but being able to present it to your product and business team in a clear, concise, and one legal voice. And I think that has been a learning opportunity every day where I try to, and I really pride myself in giving that one legal voice back to my teams, with always the asterisk and caveat saying, these regulations are currently in flight, or there's constant negotiations around this externally. And so our legal posture right now is X, Y, and Z, but let's work together. And if anything changes in terms of the regulatory landscape or the public scrutiny landscape, we may need to reassess it. And so I think that flexibility I think that flexibility also comes to those relationship buildings. If your team trusts that you will have their back and that you will be able to give them clear and concise legal advice throughout the way, they're a lot more open to accepting the reality that, that legal advice or legal posture may change.
This has been great. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I find you fascinating, and I'm so excited that you've been able to carve out the path for yourself and really show up as your true self and do the right thing and work for an amazing company and do very important work, during pandemic, election. I mean, those are not little things. Those are big things. So, I may just have, a job crush here, which I almost never have. So what you're doing is awesome. And the path you carved for yourself is super exciting. Thank you for sharing. Fatima, before you say goodbye, what is the one takeaway that you want folks who are listening, viewing this conversation have? Or maybe one thing they can do to help humanize technology law and do the right thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something that you had noted in the beginning where, I think traditionally law school has sort of forced folks and students to prioritize, having a good living, having that, partner track, law firm track, or having a positive impact in society. And I would encourage listeners, whether they're lawyers or they're not lawyers, to really, really question that. I think there is a lot of space and a lot of opportunities to be able to meld, some really, really interesting and complex questions, and working with some of the most cutting edge technology while also having a focus on social impact. I don't think you have to trade it off. I do think it might be harder to find than your more traditional paths in, say, a law firm or, investment banking, for example. But it doesn't mean that those opportunities aren't there, even in those arenas. We work closely with law firms all the time in a lot of our pro bono efforts. A lot of our engagement is with, around civil rights issues and around human rights issues. And so, if you have a passion for this space, don't think that you have to give it up to, have a successful career or, an attainable legal career. In fact, I think that there's a lot of opportunities for growth in this space, and I think it's going to continue to develop and grow.
Oh, I love this. You speak my language. Thank you so much. I really appreciated you. I love your past, and I love that you shared. And I really love the sort of the intersection of impact and technology and law. I think it's a ripe intersection, and we should all consider it, whether we exclusively do this or it's one of many responsibilities of that we do all day, every day as in-house lawyers. So thank you so much. Listeners, thank you for joining this conversation. And as to repeat again, nominate yourself or others who you want to learn from, whether it is about their career paths, about substantive law, about their community involvement, about their hobbies, because in-house lawyers are human first. They have lives at work and outside of work, and they can inspire you through all kinds of things that they do. So definitely let me know. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can DM me, you can write comments. I will get back to you. We should have conversations that allow all of us to show up at work as who we are and impact the businesses we care about. Thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you soon, and have a great day. Bye, everyone.